Present. С такими чувствами подлинного патриотизма.
Twongeye kubaha ikaze bamwanya bacu bakunzi bahe muri kwikera mu mpande z'isi kaze muri ano makuru aho tugiye kubabwira amakuru hariko aravuga ku isi muri kano kanya muri aya makuru yacu turabwira amakuru y'intambara iri kwihuza igihugu ca Ukraine n'igihugu c'Urusiya ndetse muri aya makuru turabwira turagaruka ku ijambo Perezida Vladimir Putin yavuze ku munsi w'ejo aho yasaba ko abasirikare bashasha bongerezwa mu gisirikare c'Urusiya ndetse akaba yaranagarutse ku vyuma arahabwa nucleaire aho rero abatuye isi bariko baravuga ko iri risa naho ari nk'iterabwoba rikomeye cane gose Perezida Vladimir Putin mu ijambo yaraye ashikirije ndetse rero aho na video yose y'ijambo yashikirije na YouTube ubwayo yase kwemera ko ino video yose ishigwa ku rubuga rwayo kaze n'ibana makuru twabwira ndetse n'ayavugirwe mu nama mpuzamakungu igira 27 ndetse twabwira n'ibivugwa ku migabane kaze n'ibana makuru Twongeye kubaha ikaze bamwanyi bacu bakunzi bahe tubisabwira sabone cyangwa subscribe bakoresha urinde rw'icongereza ko batarabikora ukibona hangaho uraba amakuru kuri channel yacu hakiriho igibara ry'umutuku canke risa n'agahama kuvuga ko utaragira sabone canke subscribe twagusabye kugira bige ntacyo gutwara kugira ngo twebwe channel yacu ibandanye ikurikiranwa n'abandi benshi bashaka kumenya ibiko biraba ku isi kaze rero atuye kuyahera amakuru yacu ngo twabwiye ku ntambara iri kirabera mu gihugu Cheke neza mu karere ka Dombosirijo. Intambara rero irakomeza mu karere ka Dombosirijo nkuko twari tumaze kubabwira intambara rero yatangujwe n'igihugu c'Urusiya igihugu ca Ukraine amuca Urusiya habise special operation rero intambara ikaba imaze amezi ndwi aburamo umunsi umwe wonyene kugira ngo akwire intambara hitanguye mu gihugu ca Ukraine intambara rero ikaba yagiye irarangwa n'ibice bitandukanye aho rero intambara igitangura igihugu c'Urusiya cabanje gutera igihugu hafi igihugu cyose ca Ukraine ariko mu nyuma rero igihugu c'Urusiya kiza kuri abasirikare mu bice byinshi kizagaruka mu karere ka Dombosirijo rero aho rero mu mezi ashika 3 amaze guhera Urusiya bwari bumaze gufata hafi ibice 75% by'akarere ka Dombosirijo ndetse mu mezi 5 Urusiya bwari bumaze gufata akarere kose ka Dombosirijo mu bisangi rero ariko rero ubu siko bimeze aho rero ubu igisirikare ca Ukraine kimaze kongera kugaruza ibice bitari bike mu karere ka Dombosirijo nubwo agace ka Dombosirijo twavuga ku ibice 95 hagenzurwa n'igisirikare c'Urusiya ariko rero igisirikare ca Ukraine kiriko kiragerageza akongera gufata uduce muri kano karere ka Dombosirijo ndetse nkuko bivugwa hane ubushikiranganje bwo kwivuna amazi bwa Ukraine ngo ikaba ifise umugambi wo kwirukana burundu abasirikare Urusiya kuri buno butaka bwa Ukraine mu karere ka Dombosirijo ariko rero ibi ikaba biboneka ko ari ibikomeye cyane gose ntawizera ko by'ukuri Ukraine ishobora kwirukana abasirikare Burusiya muri kano karere ka Dombosirijo turabandanya n'amakuru turabwira mu kanya uko byifashe rero ku rugamba muri kano karere ka Dombosirijo kuri uno munsi ku rubuga rw'intambara rero intambara n'ubu irakomeye cyane gose intambara ikomeye cyane kabiri kurabera mu karere ka Kisone igisirikare ca Ukraine cyamijije ko cyamaze kwigarurira akarere ka Kisone kose ariko rero ku makuru dufite muri kano kanya ntabwo by'ukuri hari uko biri kuko igisirikare c'Urusiya n'igisirikare ca Ukraine kaba gihanganye cyane gose bikomeye muri kano karere ka Kisone ariko rero bumvikana ibombe bikomeye cyane gose biva ku ruhande rw'Urusiya ndetse no ku ruhande rwa Ukraine aho biboneka rero ko ariho harabera imigwano ikomeye hindi migwano ikomeye cyane gose iri kurabera mu karere ka Izumu aho nyene igisirikare ca Ukraine cyari cyamenyesheje ko cafashe kino gisagara burundu ndetse na Perezida Zelensky akaba yagendeye kino gisagara mu kwerekana ko by'ukuri kino gisagara cyamaze gusubira mu minwe y'igisirikare ca Ukraine ariko rero igisirikare c'Urusiya cyasubiye kwakora ibitero bikomeye rero aho bariko barahagwanira ndetse intambara muri tuno turere twitwe duvuze ubu irakomeye cyane gose ndetse nta nagahengwe amasasi yaguma yumvikana buri mwanya muri tuno turere twose aboneka rero ko Uburusiya bwasubiye gukora ibindi bitero kugira ngo abusubize inyuma abasirikare ba Ukraine bariko baragwana muri tuno turere ahandi hariko habera imigwano ni hafi y'ikiga ca Zaporizhia nuclear power plant naco nyene kiri muri kano karere ka Dombosirijo naho biboneka rero aho nyene ko ingabo za Ukraine zishaka kongera kwisubiza ubugenzuzi bwa kino kigega gisanzwe kigenzurwa n'Uburusiya ndetse Perezida Vladimir Putin mu ijambo ryashikije hirya y'ejo kino kigega hakaba kivuze koko ngo Ukraine Ukraine ishaka kugiteramoamisile maze ibihishe ko ari Uburusiya bwabikoze ngo rero Uburusiya buriko burabirabira hafi bukaba buri maso buzokumira ibitero byose byokorwa byosha igeragezwa gukorwa kuri kino kigega ca Zaporizhzhia no kiyapapura kugira ngo ntigiteze ibyago isi ariko rero turazagaruka mu kanya tubabwire ijambo ryateye ubwoba isi rya Perezida Vladimir Putin ayiboneka ko Perezida Vladimir Putin yamaze kudesida neza ko intambara ya Ukraine byanka byakunda uko byagenda kose ategerezwa gutsinda tukibandanye rero muri kano karere Ukraine ko by'intambara iri kwirahuza ingabo z'Urusiya n'ingabo za Ukraine nkuko twababwiriye muri kano kanya imigwano irakomeye cyane gose ndetse abaganga uko ruhande rwa Ukraine bavuga ko hamaze gupfa abasirikare benshi ku ruhande rwa Ukraine ndetse bafise n'abakometse benshi ariko bakavuze ko ari bisanzwe kuko ngo bari ku rugamba ngo kandi byo baremenyereye ni mu kiganiro bahaye ikinyamakuru cy'abongereza CNN mu makuru baje gushikiriza mu kanya aho rero abaganga b'abasirikare ba Ukraine bavuga ko kuri intambara bamaze gutanguza muri kano karere kugaragaza kano karere abasirikare benshi ba Ukraine bamaze kwasiga ubuzima turabandanya n'amakuru yacu Tukiri nyene rero muri kano karere ka Donbas region hakomeye imigwano abategetsi b'ibisagara bya Luhansk na Donetsk Republican bakaba baratangaje ku munsi w'ejo heze ko bagiye gukoresha amatora ya kamarampaka canke amatora y'ibwizwa shingiro kugira ngo batore ko bekukiye igihugu c'Uburusiya burundu ibyo navyo bikaba byahise byamirizwa na communauté internationale ndetse bikaba byaramirijwe n'ibihugu bya Buraya biyamirizwa ndetse n'igihugu ca Amerika bavuga ko batazigera bavyemera ibihugu bya Buraya byose byavugiye rimwe ko atanumwe hazigera yemera ko zino ntara zibiri za Luhansk na Donetsk Republic naho zokora amatora yo gutora ibwizwa shingiro yemerera zino ntara zibiri kuba ku Burusiya ko batazigera bavyemera ndetse ngo ari inkuko Uburusiya buri ko buratakaza umwanya w'ubusa akaba bugomba gukoresha amatora y'ibwizwa shingiro muri tuno turere ndetse Perezida w'u France Emmanuel Macron yavuze ngo iyi ni nk'inkinamico ngo ndetse ni nk'ifilime atanumwe yifuza kuyorera ngo rero kubw'ivyo ibihugu vya Buraya ntibizogira vyemera na gato ndetse bikaba vyaramenyesheje ibihugu vya Buraya guhita vyongera gufatira ibihano tuno turere twa Donetsk ndetse na Donetsk Republic ndetse na Luhansk rero abamenyesheje ko muri uku kwezi bagiye gukoresha amatora yo kugira ngo abanyagihugu bemeze ko bavanuye na Ukraine bagiye ku gihugu c'Uburusiya ibyo bikaba vyaravugishije benshi no mu mpuzamakungu yaone aho bavuga ko Uburusiya bworeka gukora ivyo biriko burakora ibyo kunyaga igihugu ca Ukraine ngo buriko burakora ku nguvu ngo binyuranije n'amategeko yose mpuzamakungu ndetse ngo yaba n'amategeko Uburusiya buhagarariye nk'umuryango y'amaho umuryango mpuzamakungu ONU turagaruka rero mu kanya ku ijambo ya Perezida Vladimir Putin yavuze ku munsi w'ejo ijambo twabwiye ko none munsi risa n'ikora avuga kwisi cyane gose ryateye ubwoba abisi turabwira ivyo yavuze muri iryo jambo yavuze Perezida Vladimir Putin ku munsi w'ejo nkuko twabwiye rero ijambo rya Perezida Vladimir Putin yavuze ku munsi w'ejo yashikirije kuri televiziyo nkuru y'igihugu hirya y'ejo yari yashikirije irindi jambo aho yari ngo yiha ikiganiro abanditsi n'abamenyesha makuru ariko rero ku munsi w'ejo yari iramutse aheza yabwira abanyagihugu bose muri rusange aho rero ikiganiro cyamaze moya munini cyane gose ijambo rya Perezida Vladimir Putin yicaciye kuri televiziyo zose z'igihugu c'Uburusiya ijambo rero hanini rikaba bwa mbere ryahamagarira abasirikare ba reserve b'igihugu c'Uburusiya kwitegura kuja ku rugamba muri Ukraine aho yamenyesheje ngo yakiriye itikete ryavuye mu biro by'umushikanganje wo kwivuna abansi ngo ndetse ngo ni n'amankuru ijejwe amahoro n'umutekano mu gihugu c'Uburusiya ngo ahore bamusaba ko yohamagaza abasirikare ba reserve b'Uburusiya bakagenda gufashanya n'abandi ku rugamba muri Ukraine ngo maze kwiheza iryo kete ngo abona ko bikenewe rero akaba yatanze itegeko ko abasirikare ba reserve b'igihugu c'Uburusiya bitegura kuja gufashanya n'abandi mu rugamba ariko rero ibisivyo byonyene biteye ubwoba muri bano basirikare yahamagaye ba reserve akaba yahamagaje ko ku gice ca mbere hazanwa abasirikare ibihumbi amajana 3 murumva ico gitigiri n'igitigiri kinini cyane gose igitigiri c'abasirikare ibihumbi amajana 3 no kuvuga ko bano basirikare ngo ibihumbi amajana 3 akaba yamenyesheje ko ubwa mu gice ca mbere bazozana abari basanzwe bafise ubunaribonye mu vya gisirikare no kuvuga abakoze imyaka irenga 5 mu gisirikare bagaca baba abasirikare ba reserve bakaba batakiri mu gisirikare nk'abasirikare bigihe bamaha igihe cyose rero akaba yamugaje ko aho bari mu gihugu hose ko bazana twibutse rero kandi ikindi ko igisirikare cy'Uburusiya gifise abasirikare ba reserve bashika miliyoni 25 twasubiramo kandi igisirikare cy'Uburusiya gifise abasirikare ba reserve bashika miliyoni 25 murumva ko bahamagaye abasirikare 300 ni bakiya cyane ariko uganije n'abasirikare bivugwa mu Burusiya bariko baragwana mu karere mu Burusiya abashika 150 kuvuga ko abo bahamagaye bagwijwe inshuro zibiri n'abasirikare bariko baragwana mu gihugu ca Ukraine no kuvuga rero ko President Vladimir Putin yamaze kudesida ko byanka bikunda intambara ya Ukraine no Burusiya intambara y'Uburusiya na Ukraine agomba kwitsinda kwiguze icyo cyose ibi rero bikaba ndetse byahiso byamirizwa n'amakungu Uburayi bwabaye bwa mbere ku byamiza ndetse na Amerika itari byamiza ko Putin ivyo byukuri biboneka ko ata umugambi w'amahoro afise mu karere ka Buraya ahubwo ashaka intambara yuzuye ko nubwo ngo atatangaje ko Uburusiya buri mu ntambara yuzuye ngo ahubwo rero ngishini nico bisigura ko Putin yase kubwira ku mugaragaro ko ari mu ntambara yuzuye n'igihugu ca Ukraine ngo rero kuba yahamagaje abandi basirikare bane bitera sone kubona Uburusiya bubandanya buhamagaza abandi basirikare kuza kugwana mu gihugu ca Ukraine turabandanya turabwira rero ivyatebwo bakurusha muri mu jambo President Vladimir Putin yavuze kuri televiziyo zikorera mu gihugu c'Uburusiya. Mwijambo rero harikaze cyane gose rimwo ukwishongora cyane gose kwa President Vladimir Putin. President Vladimir Putin akaba yamesheje amakungu n'abatuisi mu rusange ko ibihugu by'Uburayi ndetse n'igihugu ca Amerika ko bariko baragerageza gukinyiza igihugu c'Uburusiya ndetse bakaba bashaka kugisubiza inyuma. Ibi rero akaba President Vladimir Putin yavuze ko bitazigira byemerwa n'igihe na gitoya, akaba yavuze ko Urusiya butazemerwa gusubizwa inyuma ku ntambwe bugeze ko ndetse yavuze ku kikuzi icyo cyose ko Uburusiya bwiteguye guhangana n'ibyo byose ibihugu bya Buraya biriko birakora ivyo yise ngo iterabwoba ndetse ngo no gushaka gusuzugura igihugu c'Uburusiya. Igihugu c'Uburusiya ntikizigera gisuzugurwa na gatoya, akayavuze ngo ivyo ngo barabitanguye ngo ku gihe ngo bari batanguye bazana ibigwanisho muri Ukraine ndetse kandi navuze ko hari byatumye President Vladimir Putin afata ingingo ya special operation kubera ivyo Burayi na Amerika bariko barakora mu gihugu ca Ukraine. Ijambo rero giwe rya President Vladimir Putin risa naho ryarimwo iterabwoba rikomeye cyane gose ndetse ibinyamakuru bimwe bikaba byise iterabwoba ndetse tubuse ko ino jambo ya President Vladimir Putin ryose YouTube yanse kurishirako kubera bisa nuko ari iterabwoba rikomeye cyane gose mu majambo yose President Vladimir Putin yaravuze. Ariko rero abahinga n'abashakashatsi bavuga ko atari iterabwoba ahubwo abatuisi bakwiye kwitegura neza bakaba maso bakagaba kuko President Vladimir Putin ngo keshi yarinze avuga ijambo bavuga ivyo yemera kandi ivyo avuze ashobora no kubishira mu ngiro. Turabwira rero mu kanya kandi ivyo yavuze muri ijambo bisa nuko biteye amakenga. Muri iri jambo nyene rero President Vladimir Putin yavuze ijambo risa naho ryateye ubwoba abatuye isi. President Vladimir Putin yamenyesheje ko ngo special operation iriko iragenda neza nkuko bayiteguye, ngo bavuga ko Uburusiya buriko buratsindwa ngo nabibeshe cyane gose ngo ko Uburusiya ntabwo buriko burihuta, ngo ico buriko buririnda Uburusiya ngo nukwirinda ko ngo hapfa abantu benshi cyane gose ko binzira karengane ngo mu ntambara ngo muri Ukraine. Ngo arazi rero imigabo n'imigambi y'ibihugu by'uburengerazuba bw'isi, ibihugu aho yavuze ibihugu bya Buraya ndetse n'igihugu ca Amerika. Ngo byo rero ngo Uburusiya ngo buriteguye guhangana navyo ngo kugiguze icyo cyose. Akamesheje ko ngo bibaza ngo bavuga ko ngo bafise ngo bigwanisho ngo vya nucleaire, ngo ariko rero ngo natwe bigwanisho vya nucleaire ngo turabifise ngo mbe ndetse ngo dufise ngo bigwanisho ngo bigezweho ngo birusha ngo nivyo ngo vya mu bihugu byo Burayi ngo bita ngo ko bafise. Akamesheje rero ngo mu gihe tuzobona rero umutekano wacu ugeramiwe ngo tuzokoresha ngo ibikoresho byose dufise ndetse ngo bigwanisho byose dufise ku butaka bwacu ngo tuzobikoresha. Aha rero akabavuze ngo harimo n'amabombe ya nucleaire ivyatebwa bw'isi. Rero akabavuze ngo kandi ngo nta mpuwe tuzogira. Akabavuze ngo akaba yongeye ko arangiza hino jambo yavuze ko ngo mushobora kwibaza ngo ni ivyo gufinata ngo ariko ngo ntabwo ari ivyo gufinata. Ijambo mu Congereza ibinyamakuru byinshi byagiye bigaruka ko aho yavuze ngo this is not a brief, aho yavuga rero ko ngo ibi ntabwo ari ivy'imikino ngo bituvuga ni by'ukuri n'ivyo dushobora gukora mu gihe NATO yo kubandanya yivanga mu ntambara muri Ukraine. Aha rero ababisi rero ndetse ibihugu vya Buraya na Amerika bakaba bahise bakora amanama y'ikibiriraho yabereye ku biro bikuru by'umuryango wa NATO ndetse n'abereye ku biro bikuru by'inama y'ubumwe bwa Buraya ndetse no muri Amerika, aho rero aba bose bariko biyumvira ico gukora mu gihe Perezida Vladimir Putin vy'ukuri yotegeka ko ibigwanisho vy'umbara vya nucleaire bitangura gukora muri Ukraine canke bigaterwa mu bihugu vya Buraya. Ndetse Perezida wa Amerika wewe yavuze ko kwibi biboneka vy'ukuri ko Perezida Vladimir Putin afise umugambi wo gutera mu bihugu vya Buraya. Havuga rero ngo isi yose ikwiye kuba maso witegure ko Perezida Vladimir Putin ashobora guteza ibyago isi umwanya uwo ari wose, aho yavuze ko ngo ari hebara hari n'akamaramaza ko na Perezida Vladimir Putin ashobora gutera ubwoba ibihugu vya Buraya abibwira ko afise ibigwanisho vya nucleaire ndetse ngo bifise ubushobozi kurusha n'ivyo ibihugu vya Buraya bifise. Turabandanya n'ano makuru rero aho duce tuza kubabwira muri kano kanya rero ijambo naryo rikurikira ry'umushikiranganje wo kwivuna abansi Uburusiya nawe nyene aho yakoze ikiganiro inyuma ya Perezida Vladimir Putin. Ibintu rero biraboneka ko by'ukuri bitakiri agasesero muri ko Uburusiya bufise umugambi wo gutera ibihugu vya Buraya ndetse bikaba bishobora kubyara intambara ya gatatu y'isi yose. Muri interview yamaze iminota hafi 12 Generale Shoigu mu shikiranganje wo kwivuna amazi Uburusiya yagize n'ikinyamakuru kimwe cyo mu Burusiya yamenyesheje ko ngo aho yabajijwe muri rusange yabajijwe intambara iriko iragenda no kubasirikare ko basirikare bose babakiyoboka ubutegetsi bw'Urusiya. Ikibazo ca mbere yabajijwe kuko abasirikare bakiyoboka ubutegetsi bw'Urusiya yamenyesheje ko ngo abasirikare bose n'abajenerali bose b'Urusiya baracayoboka ibwirizwa shingiro ry'Uburusiya ndetse ngo bakayoboka n'amategeko yose y'Urusiya ndetse ngo bakayoboka na kizigenza mukuru ari we Perezida Vladimir Putin. Ngo nta kibazo kihari ngo bose barakurikiza amategeko agenga igihugu ndetse bagakurikiza ngo n'ibwirizwa rikuru rya komanda mukuru ari we Perezida Vladimir Putin. Habajijwe ku kibazo cyo muri Ukraine uko byifashe ndetse ngo nuko abasirikare bamerewe bari muri Ukraine, yavuze ko ngo muri Ukraine muri rusange ngo byifashe neza, aho yavuze ko ngo raba ngo turamaze ngo kurimbera ngo akarere ka Donbas region ndetse aho yavuze ngo nk'akarere ka Donetsk ndetse na Luhansk ko kagenzurwa n'igisirikare cy'Urusiya. Akaba yanamenyesheje ngo no mu karere ka Luhansk ngo nako no mu karere nako ka Kherson ngo naho nyene igice kinini yabo kugenzurwa na twebwe ndetse no mu gace ka Yisi nako nyene ngo turagenzura igice kitari gito. Akavuga ngo na Zaporizhia ngo naho nyene ngo turahagenzura. Ngo murumva rero ko ngo ku rugamba ngo bisifashe neza. Abajijwe abasirikare bamaze kugwa ku rugamba yavuze ngo turamaze kubura ngo abasirikare ngo bihumbi ngo bishika 5 ngo n'amajana 590 ngo bane basirikare tumaze kubura ngo ariko ngo ku ruhande rwa Ukraine ngo bamaze kubura ngo abasirikare ngo barenga 100 ngo ndetse ngo n'abakomeretse barenga ku bihumbi 50 ngo murumva ko ngo ku ruhande rw'umwagwa abo duhanganye ngo ari ibyago kuri bo bikomeye cyane gose ngo n'ubwo Burayi ngo na Amerika ngo babahenze ko bariko ngo barabakingira ngo ariko rero ngo yabarabandi ngo ntibari kwemera guhendwa n'ibihugu by'uburengerazuba bw'isi. Turagaruka mu kanya ku bindi yavuze mino jambo rirerire. Ikindi kibazo kandi yahise abazwa n'umujournaliste Generale Shoigu yabajijwe ngo nimba koko Uburusiya ufise umugambi wo guhagarika ubwa Vuba special operation. Akaba yamenyesheje mu majambo yoroheje akebukebuke yavuze ngo biratangaje ngo special operation ngo iba yarahagaze ngo ariko rero ngo kubera ngo bari ku ruhande rwa Ukraine ngo ibihugu vya Buraya ngo badashaka ko ngo haba amahoro ngo nico gituma ngo ubona ngo special operation ikomeza ngo kandi ikaba ishobora gukomeza yanavuze ko ngo bamaze kuzana abasirikare benshi cyane rwose bavuye muri Amerika ndetse no mu Burayi aho yamenyesheje ngo nko muri indwi ngo haraje igitigiri c'abakomanda ngo bashika 210 bavuye muri Amerika ndetse amenyesha n'abandi bashika 100 ngo bavuye mu bihugu bya Buraya ngo bari bakaba ari bo bahagarikira urugamba muri Ukraine ngo bakaba bamwe bari ikive abandi nabo bariko kuri tele hari bahagarariye n'urugamba ngo turabizi iby'ibigwanisho navyo bajijwe iby'ibigwanisho navyo biva mu bihugu bya Buraya ndetse no muri Amerika avuga ngo igitangaje cyane gose ngo nuko Amerika ndetse no Burayi ibigwanisho barungika atari byo babwira ibinyamakuru ngo atari byo berekana ngo bavuga igitigiri gito cyane gose c'ibigwanisho barungitse kuko byinshi cyane gose turabiturira ngo twabituriye buri munsi ngo twabirashe ko ngo ndetse ngo igigwanisho cyose cinjiye ku butaka bwa Ukraine ngo tuba tubizi ngo bashobora guhenda ngo bandi bantu bose bo kwisi ngo basigaye ngo bakababesha ngo bariko barakora ibi bariko bakora biriya muri Ukraine ngo ariko rero twebwe ngo turi maso ngo ibintu byose biba muri Ukraine ngo turabigenzura ejo no murango ngo nta nakime kiducika kavuze ngo nk'ubu mu bihugu bya Buraya ngo na Amerika ngo bamaze gushinga ngo amasatelite ngo agera ngo kwijana ngo gisirikare ngo muri Ukraine ngo banashinga n'amasatelite ya gisivile ngo ashika ngo ku 200 ngo yose nayo ngo bafasha gukora ngo ariko rero ibyo byose natwe ngo turabigenzura habona ngo turabigenzura hafi ngo nta nakime bakiducika bikiboneka ngo bigaragara ngo nuko ngo bigwanisho ku ruhande rwa Ukraine ngo bigwanisho byose bya Ukraine yari ifise ngo ngo byahoze bikoreshwa na Soviet Union ngo byose turamaze kubiturira ngo no munsi nta kigwanisho na kimwe Ukraine ifise ngo atari biva mu Burayi ndetse ngo biva no muri Amerika ngo ibyo bigwanisho byonyene Ukraine no munsi iriko irakoresha ngo binavyo rero ngo tubona ko hariko gukavya ngo ku bihugu by'Uburayi ngo bariko bararenza urugero bazana n'ibigwanisho bitari byemewe kuzanwa muri Ukraine ngo ariko rero ivyo byose ngo nta nakimwe bidutwaye ngo ariko ngo ico tubona coco ngo nuko ngo mu minsi ya vuba ngo dushobora gusanga turiko turagwana na NATO ngo kandi ico ngo tubona ko arico kigiye gukurikira ngo rero ngo ntawo huma amaso ngo humirize amaso ngo abone ngo ko ibyo NATO iri kwirakora kuko ngo uyu mwanya tuvugana ngo tuharura abasirikare barenga 1000 ngo ba NATO ngo bari ku butaka bwa Ukraine ngo bariko barafashanya n'abasirikare ba Ukraine ngo ngo ntabwo ari abamasenari ngo n'abasirikare ngo ba NATO bari muri Ukraine rero ngo ico tubona ngo nuko mu misiza dushobora kuba turiko turahangana na NATO ngo ariko ngo uko biri kose turiteguye ni muri interview y'amajambo yagishura biboneka ko yishura amajambo yitonze cyane gose ndetse yenze kuyumvira aho yavuze ibintu byinshi cyane gose twenda kugaruka ko kubikubira muri Ukraine kuko ni interview ndende y'ibinota 12 akaba yavuze ko hengo ariko ngo muri byose ngo igihugu cy'Urusiya kiteguye kandi kiteguye guhangana n'uwari wese ariko ico yamenyesheje gikomeye cyane gose twakuye muri interview nuko yavuze ko mu minsi zabashobora kuba bari ko barahangana n'igisirikare ca NATO aha rero akaba ari navyo biboneka ko bishobora guhita byadura intambara ya gatatu isi yose na President Vladimir Putin mu ijambo ikiwe twabwiye bwa mbere yavuze nawe nyene yagiye abigaruka ko aho yavuze ko rero batagiye kwihangana ibihugu bya Buraya ndetse na NATO muri rusange batagiye kwihanganira ikindi twibagiye kubabwira mu ijambo ya President Vladimir Putin nuko President Vladimir Putin yavuze ko yategetse ikigo cy'Uburusiya gikora ibigwanisho bigezweho ku munsi w'ejo nyene yari yakigendeye akavuze ko yategetse ico kigo ko gitangura gutanga ibigwanisho ku ngabo z'Uburusiya ziri muri Ukraine ziri mu butumwa bw'amahoro akaba yavuze ko ari ibigwanisho byiza cyane gose bigezweho byizeyewe kandi bigiye gufasha ingabo neza z'Uburusiya ziri ku rugamba muri Ukraine turabandanya n'ano makuru yacu.
Это ребята, которые прошли через наши
inyuma rero amajambo y'abategetsi b'Uburusiya perezida ndetse n'ubushikanganje bwo kwivuna amazi perezida wa Ukraine nawe Zelensky yagize icyo avuga ku ibi ndetse aho rero perezida Zelensky ijambo yavuze mu nama mpuzamakungu ni ikoraniye inama ya 77 ikoraniye i New York aho yavuze ngo ndashima ko yatanguye avuga ko ashimira kuba fatanyabikorwa bafasha igihugu cya Ukraine kuba kiko kirigwana ko muri kino gihe kitoroshe akanamenyesha ko ashimira abo bose bashishikara kubafasha mu nzira canke iyindi Perezida Zelensky yamenyesheje ariko irindi jambo rero yaciye akurikiza asabira ibihano Uburusiya aho rero ijambo ryiwe ryadomiwe no gusaba ibihano ku Burusiya aho yavuze ngo Uburusiya ntibunakwiye no kuba bukiri mu nama mpuzamakungu yabone ngo bugifiseyo ikibanza aho asaba rero ko inama mpuzamakungu yo kwiyumvira gukuramo Uburusiya burundu ndetse akaba yasabye ko ngo Uburusiya budakwiye kugira ijambo nta namwe ku isi akaba yavuze ko yasaba ko ibindi bihano bikomeye cyane rwose bizofatirwa Uburusiya yavuze ngo kwicwa ry'abana bo mu gihugu cyacu turasabiye ibihano Uburusiya ngo kuhonyangwa ry'agateka kazina muntu ngo turasabiye ibihano Uburusiya yagenda avuga ikintu kimwe kimwe cyose cyabaye muri Ukraine mu ntambara ya Ukraine avuga ko asabye ibihano aho rero iri jambo ryiwe risa naho yaregwiriye no gusaba ibihano gusa nimubirize ijambo ryiwe ya Perezida Zelensky riri mu rurimi rw'icyongereza duce tugaruka inyuma yaryo ariko twaciye igice cyayo ko ari ijambo rirerire kugira ngo tubandanye n'amakuru yacu.
Mr. President, I have the honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement by His Excellency Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine.
Greetings to all people of the world who value peace and unity between different and equal nations. I wish you all peace. I thank you that we are united in our striving to restore peace and to guarantee peace for any nation that has become a victim of the armed aggression. A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. And Ukraine demands punishment for trying to steal our territory, punishment for the murders of thousands of people, punishment for tortures and humiliations of women and men, punishment for the catastrophic turbulence that Russia provoked with its illegal war, and not only for us, Ukrainians, but for the whole world, for every nation that is represented in this hall of the UN General Assembly. I'm speaking on behalf of the state which is forced to defend itself but has the formula for peace. I'm speaking to everyone who wants to hear how to achieve peace. I will present a formula that can work not only for us, but for everyone who may find themselves in similar circumstances as we did. It's a formula that punishes crime, protects life, restores security and territorial integrity, guarantees security, and provides determination. There are 5 preconditions for peace. Dear Mr. President of the General Assembly, dear Secretary General of the United Nations, dear heads of states and governments, dear journalists, nations of the world, Ukraine wants peace. Europe wants peace. The world wants peace. And we have seen who is the only one who wants war. There is only one entity among all UN member states who would say now, if he could interrupt my speech, that he's happy with this war, with his war. But we will not let this entity prevail over us, even though it's the largest state in the world. Ukraine showed strength on the battlefield, using its right to self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, and no one will reproach us now or in the future with weakness or inability to fight for ourselves, for our independence. We are achieving a result in this fight, and we see what the end of this war will be and what will be the guarantees of a stable peace. The UN Charter proclaims the equality of nations, and we proved that Ukraine is equal among the equals. The UN Charter protects the inviolability of borders, and we confirm our state borderline by expelling the occupiers outside. The UN Charter stipulates the value of human rights, dignity, and life, and we also stipulate them with every Ukrainian city freed from Russian occupation. We didn't provoke this war. We held 88 rounds of talks in various formats to prevent this war, just from the beginning of my presidency until February 24 this year. But Russia, instead of stopping the crime of aggression, which it started back in 2014, turned it into a full-scale invasion. And we have no choice but to defend ourselves. We do it. We push the aggressor beyond the internationally recognized border of the Ukrainian state. And this is the first item of our peace formula. Comprehensive item. Punishment. Punishment for the crime of aggression. Punishment for violation of borders and territorial integrity. Punishment that must be in place until the internationally recognized border is restored, until the aggression stops, and until the damages and losses for the war are fully compensated. Therefore, sanctions against the aggressor are part of the peace formula. Blocking the trade and relations with the aggressor is a part of the peace formula. All this is a punishment. So long as the aggressor is a party to decision-making in the international organization, he must be isolated from them, at least until aggression lasts. Reject the right to vote. Deprive delegation rights. Remove the right of veto if it is a member of the UN Security Council, in order to punish the aggressor within the institutions. We shouldn't turn a blind eye to propagandists who justify aggression, but apply a full package of personal restrictions against them. That is a punishment for lying. Citizens of the aggressor state shouldn't be allowed to enjoy tourism or shopping in the territory of those who value peace, but should be encouraged through visa restrictions to fight against the aggression of their own state. Punish for abetting the evil. A special tribunal should be created to punish Russia for the crime of aggressor against our state. This will become signal to all would-be aggressors that they must value peace or be brought to responsibility by the world. We have prepared precise steps to establish such tribunal. They will be presented to all states. Ukraine will appeal to the UN General Assembly to support an international compensation mechanism. We count on your support. Russia should pay for this war with its assets. It's also a punishment. This is one of the most terrible punishments for Russian officials who value money above everything else. The second item of the peace formula is the protection of life, the most concrete item. Now, while the sessions of the General Assembly continue in the Ukrainian town of Izum, Kharkiv region, the exhumation is underway of bodies from a mass burial which happened when the territory was controlled by Russian troops. The bodies of women and men, children and adults, Civilians and soldiers were found there, 445 graves. There is a family that died under the rubble of a house after a Russian airstrike. Father, mother, 6 and 8-year-old girls, grandparents. There is a man who was strangled with a rope. There is a woman with broken ribs and wounds on her body. There is a man who was castrated before the murder, and this is not the first case. Ask, please, the representatives of Russia why the Russian military are so obsessed with castration. What was done to them so that they want to do this to others? The only thing that differs the mass burial in Izum from what the world saw in Bucha is in fact the burial. The Russian army was in Izum for a longer time, and therefore the bodies of the killed people were buried and not scattered on the streets. So how can we allow the Russian army somewhere on Ukrainian soil, knowing that they are committing such mass murders everywhere? We cannot. We must protect life. The world must protect life. Every state suffering the armed aggression needs the opportunity to protect its citizens and liberate its territory. If it requires help with weapons or shells, they should be provided. If you needed financial help for this, it should be given. If for this it's necessary to help with the intelligence data, just do it. But what is not needed is lies. We can return the Ukrainian flag to our entire territory. We can do it with the force of arms, but we need time. We tried to speed it up. We tried to implement the basic provisions of the UN Charter for Ukraine through negotiations, but Russia is afraid of real negotiations and doesn't want to fulfill any fair international obligations. It lies to everyone, as it's typical for aggressors, for terrorists. Even now, when Russia talks about negotiations, it only wants to slow down its retreat. Russia wants to spend the winter on the occupied territory of Ukraine and prepare forces to attempt a new offensive, new Buchas, new Izums, or at least it wants to prepare fortifications on occupied land and carry out military mobilization at home. We cannot agree to a delayed war because it will be even hotter than the war now. For us, this is a war for life. That is why we need defense support, weapons, military equipment, and shells. Offensive weapons and long-range one is enough to liberate our land, and defensive systems, above all air defense. And we need financial support to keep internal stability and fulfill social obligation to our people. Physical and social protection are two elements of any nation's life. So, the second item of our peace formula is the protection of life by all available means allowed by the UN Charter. The third item of our peace formula is restoring security and territorial integrity. Look at how many elements of global security Russia has undermined with its war. Maritime safety, food safety, radiation safety, energy safety, and safety from weapons of mass destruction. We are already restoring maritime safety and food security, and I thank Mr. Antonio Guterres for his personal involvement. Algeria, Ethiopia, Egypt, Libya, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Israel, India, Iran, Yemen, Cyprus, China, Korea, Lebanon, Turkey, Belgium, Bulgaria, Greece, Ireland, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, Germany, Romania, and France have already received Ukrainian agricultural products. And we have to increase the supply by sea, both under market conditions and within the UN Food Program, for which Ukraine is always a reliable partner. And by the way, despite all the difficulties caused by the war, we decided to provide humanitarian aid to Ethiopia and Somalia. So we will send them an additional amount of our wheat, but it's more difficult with other security elements. On the eve of the General Assembly meeting, Russia fired missiles at the South Ukraine nuclear power plant. The explosion hit the station buildings. Windows were broken. Walls were damaged. The rockets exploded only 300 meters from the walls of the reactors. And this is after the IAEA's clear appeal to Russia to stop any hostile activity against any nuclear facilities of Ukraine, and in particular against the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, the largest one in Europe, which Russia has turned into a target. And that makes all of you a target. Russian radiation blackmailing is something that should concern each and every one of you, because none of you will find a vaccine against radiation sickness. The cost of living crisis continues in dozens of countries. It roots in the destabilization of the energy market. It's necessary to remove the main factor of global price turbulence, namely Russian energy blackmailing. It's necessary to cap the prices at which Russia exports its energy resources. It's necessary to make Russian oil and gas just ordinary goods again. Currently, oil and gas are Russia's energy weapons. And that is why it manipulates the markets so that electricity, gas, petrol, and diesel become the privilege of few instead of being a common goods available to all. Limiting prices is safeguarding the world. This is the way to restore energy and price security. But will the world go for it? Or will it be scared? Will it be scared of Russian threats? It's necessary to take only one strong step, after which everything will become clear. The time has come for this. This step will put everything in place. After the Russian missile terror, after the massacres, after Mariupol, after the burning of the Ukrainian prisoners in Olenivka by the Russian military, after blocking the ports, after the strikes of the Russian tanks and missiles on nuclear power plants, and after threats to use nuclear weapons, which have become the rule, not the exception for Russian propagandists. We must finally recognize Russia as the state of sponsor of terrorism at all levels, in all countries that confess the values of peace and protection of human life, legally, politically. If you don't have a legal mechanism, you can make a political decision in the parliaments. This is the foundation for restoring global security. If this strong step is taken, doubts will disappear whether to take other important steps. And what is very sensitive is the border, the territorial integrity. When one country tries to steal the territory of another state, it puts all of the world nation under attack. Global security cannot be restored without restoring the territorial integrity of the nation which suffered the armed aggression. So the third item of the Ukrainian peace formula is the restoration of security and territorial integrity. The fourth item is security guarantees. Every nation has the right to security guarantees, not only the largest nations, not only the most fortunate ones. We have proposals to upgrade the security architecture for Ukraine and for Europe and the world, which will not allow any more aggression against us. We are already presenting them to partners. Proposals for legally binding multilateral and bilateral treaties. These are the conditions for the guarantors to act and the timeline for their actions to bring results. Results on land, at sea, and in the air, in diplomacy and politics, in economy and finance, in providing weapons and intelligence. Each of you who will receive the text of our peace formula will also see the details of what we offer as security guarantees. I do not want to compare our offers with the guarantees of any alliances that exist on the planet now. I want to stress that it is always much better to guarantee the security of a nation preventively rather than to stop a war after it has already begun. And
inyuma y'ijambo rero rya Perezida Zelensky wa Ukraine twahisemo guca tumvisha ijambo nyene rya Perezida Joe Biden wa Amerika nawe nyene yavugiye ku munsi w'ejo nyene mu nama mpuzamakungu ya 77 ikoraniye i New York, aho rero Perezida Biden nawe nyene asa hano uvuga cyo kimwe na Perezida Zelensky wa Ukraine. Perezida Joe Biden wa Amerika yamenyesheje ko ngo nakumiza n'akambaro kibara ko kubona igihugu nk'Urusiya ngo gifise umwanya w'amahumu nama mpuzamakungu yawe ngo cyarafashe ingingo yo gutera igihugu kibanye ngo gishaka kunyaga igihugu kibanye ku nguvu. Bikaba rero igihugu c'Urusiya ngo arico kiko kirateza ibyago byugarije isi, aho avuga ko ngo yaba iby'inzara n'ibindi ibyago byose byugarije isi ubukene muri kino gihe ko abiterwa n'Urusiya, kandi abesheje ko Urusiya bwitwaje ko bwafatiwe ibihano budashobora guhushora umwavu ku isoko mpuzamakungu. Ibi rero Perezida Biden wa Amerika akaba nabeshuza ko Urusiya butigeze bufatirwa ibihano, butigeze bubuzwa gushora umwavu kugira ngo ibihugu bisanzwe birime bikoresheje umwavu w'Urusiya. Yavuze ati ibihano, Perezida Biden avuga ko ibihano byose bafatiye igihugu ca Urusiya, ariko ibyo gushora imfungurwa ndetse no gushora umwavu muri ivyo bihano byo bitahari. Ikindi rero Perezida Biden yagarutse ko nuko ngo Urusiya isi yose ikwiye kuja hamwe igacira umukenke igihugu c'Urusiya igafatira ibihano igihugu c'Urusiya, ndetse aho namenyesheje ko igihugu c'Urusiya kidakwiye guhabwa ijambo na hamwe. Igihugu c'Urusiya ngo catanguje intambara ngo cibeshe amakungu ko ngo umutekano wacu warugeramiwe, ngo ariko rero ngo nta na gato ngo ahubwo igihugu c'Urusiya nico kiba ngo nta na gato ntabwo byari byo uko ari kubesha, ngo ahubwo igihugu c'Urusiya nico kibangamiye umutekano w'isi. Igihugu c'Urusiya ngo yari imigambi yo gushaka kunyaga igihugu ca Ukraine ubutaka bw'igihugu kibanye kigenga gisanzwe cemewe n'inama mpuzamakungu. Ngo rero Urusiya nivyo buriko burakora. Akaba yavuze rero ngo twebwe nka Amerika abakunda amahoro ndetse na demokarasi ngo tuzokora ibishoboka byose kugira ngo turinde igihugu ca Ukraine, aho yamenyesheje ko bamaze gutanga miliyaridi 25 z'amadolari y'abanyamerika ngo mu gufasha gukingira igihugu ca Ukraine, aho yavuze ko aya mafaranga miliyaridi 25 z'abanyamerika amaze kuja mu kugura ibigwanisho, ayandi nayo ngo mu gufasha mu iterambere y'abanyagihugu mu gihugu ca Ukraine. Akamesheje ko ngo hamwe rero n'ibihugu birenga 130 bifashanya nabo ngo bamaze gutanga ngo hafi miliyaridi 50 z'amadolari y'abanyamerika ku gihugu ca Ukraine. Amahera yose akaba rero bari yamaze gukora muri intambara y'igihugu ca Ukraine. Rero hanamenyesha ko ngo abafatanyabikorwa ba Ukraine ngo nubagiye kubandanya bafasha igihugu ca Ukraine gushika igihugu ca Ukraine cikuye mu mugozi w'intambara igihugu c'Urusiya cyashitse ko avuga ko rero batazocika intege, ahubwo ngo igihugu c'Urusiya kimenye ko batagiye gucika intege, ngo Putin amenye ko ata gusubira inyuma, ngo agomba kugwanywa ngo ku buryo bwose bushoboka bwose mu mpaka atsindwe, ngo asubize ngo areke igihugu cigenge, ngo amahoro na demokarasi ngo bari byo biganza mu karere k'Uburayi. Akaba yanamenyesheje ko kandi habaye cyane rwose yumva ndetse ngo ari ibiterasoni ngo kubona Uburusiya bwasubiriye kumenyesha ko bushobora gukoresha ibigwanisho vya nucleaire ngo bugatera ubwoba ibihugu vya Buraya. Yavuze ngo Perezida Putin ngo atagira n'isoni ngo ngiye gutera ubwoba ibihugu vya Buraya ko ashobora kubitera akoresheje ibigwanisho vy'ubumara bwa nucleaire, ko akaba yirengagije amasezerano yose agenga ibigwanisho vy'ubumara bwa nucleaire yasinye ko umukono, ndetse ngo natwe twasinye ku mukono. Ibyo byose yabirenze ko nkuru munsi yamenyesha ko ngo ashobora gutera ibihugu vya Buraya ngo akoresheje ibigwanisho vya nucleaire. Ibi rero akaba yavyemeje ndetse akaba yavuze ko ngo n'isi vyameze, akaba yanamenyesheje ko bagiye kugira inama ihuta hamwe n'ibihugu vya Buraya kugira ngo barabe icokorwa ngo mu gihe Uburusiya bwobandanya umugambi wabo wo gutera ibihugu vya Buraya ukoresheje ibigwanisho vya nucleaire. Ariko rero Amerika ikaba yanamenyesheje ko ngo Uburusiya butohirahira bwibeshe ko kuko bwose bwo bufise ibigwanisho vya nucleaire bwonyene ngo n'abandi barabifise, ngo nubwo Uburusiya bwamenyesheje ko bufise ibigwanisho ngo bigezweho kurusha ibindi, ngo ariko rero ngo biragaragara ko ngo Uburusiya nguko bwari bwiteze ubushobozi bufise muri Ukraine batariko byagenze, ngo rero n'ubu ngo ntibishongore cyane rwose kuko ngo natwe ibigwanisho vy'ubumara ngo turabifise. Ariko ntiyavuze diregite ko bafise ibigwanisho vy'ubumara, ariko yavuze ngo natwe ngo turiteguye ngo kwishura igihugu c'Uburusiya ngo mu gihe cohirahira kigakoresha ibigwanisho vy'ubumara. Ivyo vyavuzwe na Perezida Joe Biden wa Amerika. Namubwirize mu ijambo rirerire nawe nyene yavuze, twashimye kubaha igice caryo. Tuca tugaruka mu kanya turangiza ano makuru.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow leaders, in the last year, our world has experienced great upheaval. A growing crisis in food insecurity, record heat, floods, and droughts, COVID-19, inflation, and a brutal, needless war. A war chosen by one man, to be very blunt. Let us speak plainly. A permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invaded its neighbor, attempted to erase a sovereign state from the map. Russia has shamelessly violated the core tenets of the United Nations Charter. No more important than the clear prohibition against countries taking the territory of their neighbor by force. Again, just today, President Putin has made overt nuclear threats against Europe and a reckless disregard for the responsibilities of the non-proliferation regime. Now, Russia's calling up more soldiers to join the fight, and the Kremlin is organizing a sham referenda to try to annex parts of Ukraine, an extremely significant violation of the UN Charter. This world should see these outrageous acts for what they are. Putin claims he had to act because Russia was threatened. But no one threatened Russia, and no one other than Russia sought conflict. In fact, we warned it was coming, and with many of you we worked to try to avert it. Putin's own words make his true purpose unmistakable. Just before he invaded, Putin asserted, and I quote, "Ukraine was created by Russia and never had, quote, real statehood." And now we see attacks on schools, railway stations, hospitals, on centers of Ukrainian history and culture. In the past, even more horrifying evidence of Russia's atrocity and war crimes. Mass graves uncovered in Izium, bodies, according to those who excavated those bodies, showing signs of torture. This war is about extinguishing Ukraine's right to exist as a state, plain and simple, and Ukraine's right to exist as a people. Whoever you are, wherever you live, whatever you believe, that should make your blood run cold. That's why 141 nations in the General Assembly came together and to unequivocally condemn Russia's war against Ukraine. The United States has marshaled massive levels of security assistance and humanitarian aid and direct economic support for Ukraine. More than $25 billion to date. Our allies and partners around the world have stepped up as well. And today, more than 40 countries represented in here have contributed billions of their own money and equipment to help Ukraine defend itself. The United States is also working closely with our allies and partners to impose costs on Russia, to deter attacks against NATO territory, to hold Russia accountable for the atrocities and war crimes. Because if nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for, everything. Every victory won on the battlefield belongs to the courageous Ukrainian soldiers. But this past year, the world was tested as well. And we did not hesitate. We chose liberty. We chose sovereignty. We chose principles to which every party to the United Nations Charter is beholding. We stood with Ukraine. Like you, the United States wants this war to end on just terms, on terms we all signed up for, that you cannot seize a nation's territory by force, that the only country standing in the way of that is Russia. So we, each of us in this body, who's determined to uphold the principles and beliefs we pledge to defend as members of the United Nations, must be clear, firm, and unwavering in our resolve. Ukraine has the same rights that belong to every sovereign nation. We will stand in solidarity with Ukraine. We will stand in solidarity against Russia's aggression, period. Now, it's no secret that in the contest between democracy and autocracy, the United States and I, as President, champion a vision for our world that's grounded in the values of democracy. The United States is determined to defend and strengthen democracy at home and around the world, because I believe democracy remains humanity's greatest instrument to address the challenges of our time. We're working with the G7 and like-minded countries to prove democracies can deliver for their citizens, but also deliver for the rest of the world as well. But as we meet today, the UN Charter's very basis of a stable and just rule-based order is under attack by those who wish to tear it down or distort it for their own political advantage. And the United Nations Charter was not only signed by democracies of the world, it was negotiated among citizens, dozens of nations with vastly different histories and ideologies, united in their commitment to work for peace. As President Truman said in 1945, the UN Charter, and I quote, is proof that nations like men can state their differences, can face them, and then can find common ground on which to stand, end of quote. That common ground was so straightforward, so basic, that today 193 member states have willingly embraced its principles. And standing up for those principles for the UN Charter is the job of every responsible member state. I reject the use of violence and war to conquer nations or expand borders through bloodshed, to stand against global politics of fear and coercion, to defend the sovereign rights of smaller nations as equal to those of larger ones, to embrace basic principles like freedom of navigation, respect for international law, and arms control. No matter what else we may disagree on, that is the common ground upon which we must stand. If you're still committed to a strong foundation for for the good of every nation around the world, then the United States wants to work with you. I also believe the time has come for this institution to become more inclusive so that it can better respond to the needs of today's world. Members of the UN Security Council, including the United States, should consistently uphold and defend the UN Charter and refrain from the use of the veto, except in rare, extraordinary situations, to ensure that the Council remains credible and effective. That is also why the United States supports increasing the number of both permanent and non-permanent representatives of the Council. This includes permanent seats for those nations we have long supported and permanent seats for countries in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The United States is committed to this vital work. In every region, we've pursued new, constructive ways to work with partners to advance shared interests, from elevating the Quad in the Indo-Pacific to signing the Los Angeles Declaration of Migration and Protection at the Summit of the Americas, to joining a historic meeting of 9 Arab leaders to work toward a more peaceful, integrated Middle East, to hosting the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in this December. As I said last year, the United States is opening an era of relentless diplomacy to address the challenges that matter most to people's lives, all people's lives. Tackling climate crisis, as the previous speaker spoke to, strengthening global health security, feeding the world. We made that priority, and 1 year later, we're keeping that promise. From the day I came to office, we've led with bold climate agenda. We rejoined the Paris Agreement, convened the major climate summits, helped deliver critical agreements on the COP26. We helped get 2/3 of the world's GDP on track to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And now, I've signed a historic piece of legislation here in the United States that includes the biggest, most important climate commitment we have ever made in the history of our country, $369 billion toward climate change. That includes tens of billions in new investments in offshore wind and solar, doubling down on zero-emission vehicles, increasing energy efficiency, supporting clean manufacturing. Our Department of Energy estimates that this new law will reduce U.S. emissions by 1 gigaton a year by 2030, while unleashing a new era of clean energy-powered economic growth. Our investments will also help reduce the cost of developing clean energy technologies worldwide, not just in the United States. This is a global game changer, and none too soon. We don't have much time. We all know we're already living in a climate crisis. No one seems to doubt it after this past year. Much of Pakistan is still underwater, needs help. Meanwhile, the Horn of Africa faces unprecedented drought. Families are facing impossible choices, choosing which child to feed and wondering whether they'll survive. This is the human cost of climate change, and it's growing, not lessening. So as I announced last year, to meet our global responsibility, my administration is working with our Congress to deliver more than $11 billion a year to international climate finance, to help lower-income countries implement their climate goals and ensure a just energy transition. The key part of that will be our PEPFAR plan, which will help 500 million people in especially vulnerable countries adapt to the impacts of climate change and build resilience. This need is enormous. So let this be the moment we find within ourselves the will to turn back the tide of climate devastation, and unlock a resilient, sustainable, clean energy economy to preserve our planet. On global health, we've delivered more than 620 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to 116 countries around the world, with more available to help meet countries' needs. All free of charge, no strings attached, and we're working closely with the G20 and other countries in the United States, helped lead the change to establish a groundbreaking new fund for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response at the World Bank. At the same time, we've continued to advance the ball on enduring global health challenges. Later today, I'll host the 7th Replenishment Conference for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. With bipartisan support in our Congress, I have pledged to contribute up to $6 billion to that effort. So I look forward to welcoming a historic round of pledges at the conference, resulting in one of the largest global health fundraisers ever held in all history. We're also taking down the food crisis head on, with as many as 193 million people around the world experiencing acute food insecurity, a jump of 40 million in a year. Today I'm announcing another $2.9 billion in U.S. support for life-saving humanitarian and food security assistance for this year alone. Russia, in the meantime, is pumping out lies, trying to pin the blame for the crisis, the food crisis, on the sanctions imposed by many in the world for the aggression against Ukraine. So let me be perfectly clear about something. Our sanctions explicitly allow Russia the ability to export food and fertilizer. No limitation. It's Russia's war that is worsening food insecurity, and only Russia can end it. I'm grateful for the work here at the UN, including your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, establishing a mechanism to export grain from Black Sea ports in Ukraine that Russia had blocked for months, and we need to make sure it's extended. We believe strongly in the need to feed the world. That's why the United States is the world's largest supporter of the World Food Program, with more than 40% of its budget. We're the leading support of the UNICEF efforts to feed children around the world. To take on a larger challenge of food insecurity, the United States introduced a call to action, a roadmap eliminating global food insecurity, that more than 100 nation member states have already supported. In June, the G7 announced more than $4.5 billion to strengthen food security around the world through USAID's Feed the Future initiative. The United States is scaling up innovative ways to get drought and heat-resistant seeds into the hands of farmers who need them, while distributing fertilizer and improving fertilizer efficiency so that farmers can grow more while using less. And we're calling on all countries to refrain from banning food exports or hoarding grain while so many people are suffering. Because in every country in the world, no matter what else divides us, if parents cannot feed their children, nothing else matters. If parents cannot feed their children. As we look to the future, we're working with our partners to update and create rules of the road for new challenges we face in the 21st century. We launched the Trade and Technology Council with the European Union to ensure that key technologies are developed and governed in the way that benefits everyone. With our partner countries and through the UN, we're supporting and strengthening the norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and working to hold accountable those who use cyber attacks to threaten international peace and security. With partners in the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific, we're working to build a new economic ecosystem where every nation gets a fair shot, and economic growth is resilient, sustainable, and shared. That's why the United States has championed a global minimum tax, and we will work to see it implemented so major corporations pay their fair share everywhere. It's also been the idea behind the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which the United States launched this year with 13 other Indo-Pacific economies. We're working with our partners in ASEAN and the Pacific Islands to support a vision for a critical Indo-Pacific region that is free and open, connected and prosperous, secure and resilient. Together with partners around the world, we're working to secure resilient supply chains that protect everyone from coercion or domination, and ensure that no country can use energy as a weapon. And as Russia's war riles the global economy, we're also calling on major global creditors, including the non-Paris Club countries, to transparently negotiate debt forgiveness for lower-income countries, to forestall broader economic and political crisis around the world. Instead of infrastructure projects that generate huge and large debt without delivering on the promised advantages, let's meet the enormous infrastructure needs around the world with transparent investments, high-standard projects that protect the rights of workers and the environment, key to the needs of the communities they serve, not to the contributor. That's why the United States, together with fellow G7 partners, launched a Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. We intend to collectively mobilize $600 billion in investment through this partnership by 2027. Dozens of projects are already underway. Industrial-scale vaccine manufacturing in Senegal, transformative solar projects in Angola, first-of-its-kind small modular nuclear power plant in Romania. These are investments that are going to deliver returns not just for those countries, but for everyone. The United States will work with every nation, including our competitors, to solve global problems like climate change. Climate diplomacy is not a favor to the United States or any other nation, and walking away hurts the entire world. Let me be direct about the competition between the United States and China. As we manage shifting geopolitical trends, the United States will conduct itself as a reasonable leader. We do not seek conflict. We do not seek a Cold War. We do not ask any nation to choose between the United States or any other partner. But the United States will be unabashed in promoting our vision of a free, open, secure, and prosperous world and what we have to offer communities of nations. Investments that are designed not to foster dependency, but to alleviate burdens and help nations become self-sufficient. Partnerships not to create political obligation, but because we know our own success. Each of our successes increased when other nations succeed as well. When individuals have the chance to live in dignity and develop their talents, everyone benefits. Critical to that is living up to the highest goals of this institution, increasing peace and security for everyone, everywhere. The United States will not waver in our unrelenting determination to counter and thwart the continuing terrorist threats to our world. And we will lead with our diplomacy to strive for peaceful resolution of conflicts. We seek to uphold peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. We remain committed to our one China policy, which has helped prevent conflict for 4 decades. And we continue to oppose unilateral changes in the status quo by either side. We support an African Union-led peace process to end the fighting in Ethiopia, restore security for all its people. In Venezuela, where years of political oppression have driven more than 6 million people from that country, we urge the Venezuelan-led dialogue and return to free and fair elections. We continue to stand with our neighbor in Haiti as it faces political, fueled gang violence and an enormous human crisis. And we call on the world to do the same. We have more to do. We'll continue to back the UN-mediated truce in Yemen, which has delivered precious months of peace to people that have suffered years of war.
tukiri nyene rero ngaha New York muri Amerika ariko harabera inama ya 77 y'umuryango mpuzamakungu. Abakuru b'ibihugu rero benshi bamaze gushikiriza ijambo ryabo muri ino nama, aho rero nka perezida w'igihugu ca Kenya mukaba ari na perezida mushasha muri inama yamenyesheje ko ashimira imijambo yiwe, yavuze ko bwa mbere ashimira igihugu ca Kenya kuba carakoze amatora mu kuri no mu muco, ndetse amatora ya demokarasi akaba kubisikanya ubutegetsi ku butegetsi mu nzira ya demokarasi. Akaba yaciye abandanizaho rero amenyesha ibyago bihanze isi, aho yavuze nk'ubukene ndetse n'ikiza ca COVID-19, aho yamenyesheje rero ngo ibihugu biri mu nzira y'amajambere ngo birakwiye gufashwa, ndetse ngo bikaba birahagarikiwe kwishuzwa amadeni bisanzwe biheranye ngo kubera ibihugu bimwe bimwe bidafise ubushobozi bwo kwishura amadeni, kubera ubutunzi bw'ibihugu byinshi bwagiye burahagarara kubera ikiza ca COVID-19 ndetse ngo n'ibindi biza bihanze isi. Aha yashatse kuvuga nk'intambara ya Ukraine n'Uburusiya, ariko nubwo yirinze kuvuga intambara ya Ukraine n'Uburusiya, ariko yavuze ngo n'ibindi byago byose bihansize, aho yavuze ngo n'ihindagurika ry'ibirere. Perezida William Ruto akaba yamenyesheje ko ashimira igihugu ca Amerika kuba igihugu ca Amerika congeye gusaba ko inama nkuru akanama abagize akanama gakuru ku United Nation ko kakwiye guhindurwa kugira ngo hongerwemo ibindi bihugu byo ku mugabane wa Afrika. Ibi navyo rero William Samuel Ruto akaba yabishimye cyane, akaba yanasabye rero nk'ibindi yavuze mu ijambo ryiwe, yasabye ibigega nka IMF na Banki Mondiale ko byo kwiyumvira kongera kugurana amahera atagira inyungu ibihugu vya Afrika biri mu nzira y'amajambere ivyahuye n'ibyago n'ibiza bitandukanye. Akaramishije ko kandi igihugu ca Kenya citeguye gukorana n'umuryango mpuzamakungu ndetse n'indi amashami yose ava kuri uno muryango. Yavuze ko igihugu ca Kenya ngo gisanzwe gicumbikiye amashami amwe y'umuryango, ndetse ngo igihugu ca Kenya kikaba citeguye no gutanga ubundi butaka bwo kubaka izindi nyubakwa z'umuryango mpuzamakungu. Akavuze ko igihe cyose umuryango mpuzamakungu ugomba kubaka izindi nyubakwa muri Kenya, iteguye gutanga ubutaka bwo kugira ngo amashami ya ONU aronke ahakorera ku mugabane wa Afrika. Ibi ni muri byinshi cyane rwose yavuze mu ijambo ryiwe ryamaze hafi iminota 20. Mwumvirize igice cy'ijambo rya perezida William Samuel Ruto w'igihugu ca Kenya, aho rero duca hatubandanya n'amakuru inyuma y'iri jambo ryiwe.
Assemblée générale, j'ai l'honneur de souhaiter la bienvenue à son Excellence Monsieur William Samoei Ruto, président et commandant en chef des forces de défense de la République du Kenya, et je l'invite à prendre la parole devant l'Assemblée.
Mr. President of this 77th session of the UN General Assembly, Your Excellency Saba Korosi, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I am grateful for the immense privilege to join Your Excellencies in this distinguished assembly, a privilege made possible by peaceful, democratic transition following free and fair elections in Kenya on the 9th of August, 2022. Elections that not only stand as testimony of the universal power of democracy, but also of the manifest ability of African peoples to invest in stronger nations and a secure future, robust institutions, effective constitutions, and the impartial administration of the rule of law guarantees the achievement of shared aspirations. This 77th session of the UN General Assembly comes at a unique moment when the entire world is struggling with multiple grave challenges that include regional conflicts, the COVID-19 pandemic, the triple planetary crisis, food insecurity, and the rising cost of living. I take this opportunity to congratulate you, Mr. President, on your election to preside over this session, and to express my confidence that your wealth of experience offers us significant assurance of your good leadership. Your motto, Solutions through solidarity, sustainability, and science succinctly captures with particular resonance the urgent imperatives of our time. I assure you of Kenya's firm support and cooperation during your tenure. I further take this opportunity to commend your predecessor, His Excellency Abdullah Shahid, for his bold steps in steering the United Nations community and for ensuring its business continuity under the unprecedented circumstances occasioned by multiple global threats, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, human well-being is under grave threat. The health of the planet requires urgent attention. The immense pressure exerted by conventional threats such as climate change, the global food crisis, terrorism, cybercrime, and armed conflict has been compounded by unprecedented, devastating disruptions due to COVID-19. I express my approval of the theme for this session, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges. Because it boldly signals the window of opportunity we now have to escalate our engagement from firm consensus to decisive action. In many respects, the COVID-19 pandemic stripped us of many illusions and exposed stark justice and solidarity deficits in the face of existential crisis. It brought into sharp focus the global economy's two-lane highway, repressively patrolled by a rising tide of exclusionist nationalism, a specter that undermines prospects of collective action and significantly impairs the resolve of the international community to guarantee fundamental rights, including safety and dignity of the world's vulnerable majority. It is also for this reason that many nations, especially from the global south, now advocate for the democratization of the global governance and a reimagined multilateralism that is inclusive and works for the good of all. Kenya stands ready to work with other nations to achieve the Pan-Africanization of multilateralism and a more just and inclusive system of global governance. It is important to reflect on these matters as we do our best to get our people, enterprises, and industries back on their feet so that the engine of development can power our societies towards prosperity that actually leaves no one behind. Building back better is the universal rallying call to incorporate lessons learned into doing more in a better way to recover from the shock. I suggest that we have a golden opportunity to faithfully adhere to this motto by augmenting it inward and indeed with an additional B, building back better from the bottom. Building back better from the bottom upwards is essentially about including the marginalized working majority in the economic mainstream. The bottom millions relentlessly wage their daily battle for survival in a crowded arena characterized by scarcity of opportunity and generally precarious existence. The ingenuity, optimism, resilience, and energy in this ever-bustling bottom is sometimes called hustling. Invisibly to policymakers and beyond the reach of many public services, these hustlers take nothing for granted, surviving overwhelming odds and frequently succeeding greatly. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, things may come to those who wait, but only things left behind by those who hustle. It is time to bolster the resilience of our nations, to mainstream these millions through deliberate strategies and efforts for economic inclusion by building back better from the bottom up. The interlocking challenges of conflicts, triple planetary crisis, and the global food crisis have impeded our momentum and obstructed our focus on achieving fundamental transformations towards sustainable development. In the Horn of Africa region, severe drought and disruption of supply chains due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the Russia-Ukraine conflict, have left us food insecure, and consequently, we have been constrained to repurpose our strategies to prioritize drought and famine relief, insulating education and disruption, and improving social protection and healthcare systems to secure the well-being of our people. Many countries now bear witness to the unsettling phenomena of rivers, canals, and water reservoirs that are drying up on account of drought and heat waves occasioned by climate change. Kenya is no exception. The northern arid and semi-arid rangelands of our country have been gravely impacted by drought, whose severity has not been seen or experienced in 40 years. 3.1 million residents of these atolls are now severely food insecure on account of scarce rainfall over 3 consecutive seasons, leading to poor crop and pasture. This unprecedented confluence of intensely adverse events has exacerbated water scarcity and starvation, worsened by rising food prices, thus complicating Kenya's roadmap towards delivering good quality of life to our citizens and hindering the progress to achieving SDG number 6 and SDG number 2.
Amakuru yacu rero reka tubananize mu gihugu ca Pakistan. Igihugu ca Pakistan rero kimaze iminsi cyatewe n'ibyago vy'imyuzure. Imyuzure ikomeye cyane gose yateye mu gihugu ca Pakistan, aho rero abantu batari bake benshi cyane gose bataye amazu yabo ndetse abandi barafa. Rero umunyamabanga mukuru wabone akaba yasabye ko ibihugu bifise uburyo byo kwihutira gutabara igihugu ca Pakistan ko kiri mu byago bikomeye cyane gose vy'imyuzure yateye. Imyuzure nayo rero ikaba iva kwindagurika hagibihe, aho yanamenyesheje ko ibihugu byose bikwiye kwiyumvira ico byokora kugira ngo bikinge iby'ihindagurika ry'ibihe. Biboneka ko ihindagurika ry'ibihe ryabaye ndase ku isi, aho rero isi iboneka ko igeramiwe n'ihindagurika ry'ibihe rikomeye cyane gose, aho imyuzure n'imiriro ndetse n'izuba rirenze urugero bimaze igihe biboneka kuri isi yacu. Rero ibi byose rero bikaba ari bimwe mu byagiye byigwa byagiye bigaruka ko n'abategetsi benshi cyane gose bavuze muri nama nkuru ya 77 y'umuryango mpuzamakungu ONU, aho rero bose bamwe bagiye bemeza ivyo bagiye gukora kugira ngo bagarukire ibidukikije na cyane cyane kugira ngo isi isubire kubaho uko yari ibayeho, aho bavuga ko ngo hamwe hatogira igikorwa mu myaka 20 iri imbere isi yoba igoranye kubako cyane gose, ndetse ubuzima bwo bari ntabwo kuri isi. Rero bakaba hamugariye abantu bose bari ku isi kugira ico bakoze mu gukingira ibidukikije kugira ngo isi ndimwa canke isi tubaye ko ngo yongere isubire kuba neza nko yari iri. Ibiro bakaba bavugiye batanga urugero bw'ibyago bitandukanye ibyabaye muri Pakistan ndetse ibyabaye no mu bindi bihugu byinshi byaba no ku mugabane wa Afurika ndetse no mu burengerazuba bwa Aziya. Ibyago bitandukanye by'imiriro n'imyuzure ya hato ntatoya nk'ibyabaye muri Korea y'Epfo. Ibi byose rero bikaba ari byagiye bigaruka ko muri iyi nama mpuzamakungu ONU iriko ikoraniye New York ya 77. Naha rero duciye turangiriza amakuru yacu, ariko tubutsa ko kugira sabone cyangwa subscribe ku bakoresha ururimi rw'icongereza. Mwakoze, Imana ishikare kubazigama no kubarinda mu byanyu no mu banyu.